I have to tell you, you have just put the most positive spin on the word mandate. Because I think oftentimes when you hear about AI mandates, it is like, thou shalt adopt AI. What you're saying is it is more, I think, mandating a mindset and sharing and experimentation.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Responsive Podcast. I'm Jennifer Cannizzaro, and I am joined today with Matt Schiffman. Matt, so delighted to be with you today. You have had quite the illustrious career with executive roles in the financial services industry, working across product, distribution, marketing, which is a pretty incredible view to have. I would love for you to just kick it off and tell me, how did you find yourself in the land of financial services, and what's your journey really been?
Well, it's very kind of you to ask, Jennifer. I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you for all that. My journey really began in '81 when I talked my way into the business. Frankly, bought a new suit and talked my way into a job as an account executive with Drexel Burnham Lambert in 1981. And in the course of that time, I've traveled a lot of the roads of the financial services ecosystem, from being an advisor to being a wholesaler to being a sales manager, head of distribution, global chief marketing officer. My journey also took me into the world of data as I built a little company that got absorbed into Broadridge in 2018. In 2023, I had fulfilled my obligation to them, came out, started another business, which is leveraging artificial intelligence, large language models. So, all of it's related. But it's a wonderful and it's just a wonderful industry to be in. So I'm not letting go anytime soon.
Well, that's incredible. I've met quite a few lifers like yourself who get in and stay. And I have to tell you, I have a lot of appreciation when I talk to our customers and others in financial services, because especially when it comes to the volume of information that they're processing and the way they're really interfacing with their clients around not only RFPs, but due diligence questionnaires and really a lot of additional documentation, got to be pretty sophisticated to do that. And so, I would actually love to hear from you, like, what's your view, having seen so much in your career around, the role that a proposal team really plays inside of a large financial institution?
Yeah. So one of the uh, I think more interesting aspects about this industry is the way that it evolves, and in the course of my experience and many others, how the industry has evolved in terms of crafting new solutions to benefit ultimately the investors, to improve their lives, to improve their portfolios, their outcomes, et cetera. All of that, when you work it back up the funnel or the chain, means that the RFP, DDQ teams, who are become increasingly involved in solving for requests for information for in the RFP and the DDQ process. And so, and I think statistics will bear this out. In fact, I'm sure they will. Is that the level of volume continues to go up, as well as the complexity, because as these products become increasingly more sophisticated, the need to be able to articulate and respond to the queries, or in any fashion, are such that it becomes more taxing, more time intensive for the individuals who are involved in that process. And so, and the reason I think it's become increasingly more interesting is because the advent of artificial intelligence and what that will mean potentially as it relates to affecting these teams. But I'm sure you and I will get into where these teams sit, what are the challenges they face, and what are the challenges that the firms themselves, who the asset managers in particular, who are engaged in responding to these requests, what it means for them. So hopefully that answers your question.
For sure. And we'll kind of unravel this thread as we go, because there's a lot in that. And I think, starting with the position that these teams are in, what would you say to someone who said that proposal teams are really just kind of a a utility player. Like, how do you see that?
I disagree strongly with that conversation, Jennifer. I was the global chief marketing officer of Legg Mason, which is now Franklin. And interestingly, in my experience in the U.S., that team reported into marketing, whereas overseas are reported into product. And I can understand the split and the reason for that. I think the challenge is that because of the nature of the volume and because of the nature of the work, that irrespective of where this team sits, I think that there's a missed opportunity. And specifically, and you and I have talked about this offline, but specifically, there's a missed opportunity, in my opinion, if this team is seen as purely a utility, a cut and paste, get it in, comes in the door, get it out the door, make sure it's accurate, make sure it reflects, the process that the firm takes to manage money, for example. But what's lost in all of that, in my opinion, is you lose the ability to tell a story. And I think the underlying fabric of how I feel about all this, or actually the thread in the fabric, I should say, is that storytelling is such an important part of a differentiator in the marketplace between, say, asset manager A and asset manager B, that to lose that opportunity at the front, to your point, at the front of the client experience, I mean, most specifically in an RFP situation, if it's a first time that you're engaging with a potential client, they're at the front of the experience experience line there, a continuum. And if it's purely a perfunctory cut and paste, you're losing the opportunity to tell the story. So I think it's a mistake to see those teams as purely utility players. In fact, I think that they're essential to the storytelling process, and there are ways that they should be incorporated in that. But I think that anyone who doesn't think of them that way, I think is missing an opportunity.
So it's an excellent point that you're making. What my question back to you would be, how do you really drive that transformation from this perception or maybe even a reality of cut paste to storytelling? What does that look like?
I think it starts at the top. There has to be a recognition from leadership that every piece of the puzzle within the firm, every part of the organization has an economic value to it, right? Traditionally, the sales team, and understandably, are perceived as the sales or revenue generated for the firm, on top of the asset management piece, obviously. But the sales people are the ones who are out there getting the clients in. But the truth of the matter is that if you think about it more broadly, the opportunity to tell the story is integral to almost every aspect of that client experience. So any way that a client or prospective client experiences the firm in any way, whether we're talking about salespeople, we're talking about the marketing literature, the story that's being told, where we're talking about the RFP teams, right? It is the story being told. And so I think leadership first has to recognize, all right, how do we ensure, because they spend a great deal of money on their brand, they think a lot about their brand and their value proposition. How do we ensure that value proposition, which is so critical to us and so differentiates us beyond just performance, as people start to think performance and money management is commoditized? Unfortunately, there's a great feeling around that. How do we differentiate ourselves from the competition? Well, it's the way we present ourselves. It's a story. It's the brand that we want to do. Okay, well, where are all the elements that the client would experience that brand, would understand what we do, would differentiate the way people perceive us? And if you think about that, and if leadership is engaged in that way and committed to that, and focused on that, to organize all the teams, which can be very, could become very separated and siloed the bigger the firm becomes, but specifically organizes meetings where all of the players, all of the stakeholders within the firm, Jennifer, have an opportunity to get together, sit down, think about what it is we're trying to put forth out there, and how do we ensure that whatever we say reflects that, and however we follow up on that reinforces that message that we're trying to get across the brand.
What I would add to that is there's an opportunity to really harness that knowledge and the way you're telling that story
Yeah.
in, as you said, multiple touch points, multiple vehicles.
Yeah.
What I've seen in some institutions is that they are very specialized. Here's my RFP team, here's my DDQ team. I've got this sales team and they're great, but you know what? I'm going to keep all of this to myself because I don't I don't trust those teams to be using it in the right way. Or let's add in the layer of compliance. Like, will they pass that bar as they're putting that out in materials or conversations with customers? And that feels like a big missed opportunity to me as well, because you've got all of this knowledge. You know, how can you really weave that across the journey? So there is the story, and then there's also the consistency of that beyond that early stage of the RFI or the RFP. So
Yeah.
like how do you really orchestrate that, and how do you change the way that people are behaving to really allow that to be possible?
It would seem to me that, at least from my own experience, is that the real driver here of behavior in the industry, understandably, is economics, right? And you're looking at an industry, specifically in asset management, where fees are going down, um, margins are impacted and compressed, and so firms are looking for, understandably, where can we get economies of scale? Where can we improve? Where can we outrun our expenses? And typically in sales. But the challenge with size, which the benefit of size, of course, is that it brings potential efficiencies and economies of scale. But the downside of size, in particular, is that you begin to silo. It's just a function of any organization. You are moving into silos. If you think about, or if firms would think about, all right, how much, and I know they do, I was there, we think about, okay, what is the expense of department A? What's the expense of department B? What's the expense of department C, et cetera, down the line. When you think about what you are spending, for your RFP, RFI, DDQ teams, and the amount of hours they're putting into, and what is at stake, right? Economically for the firm, opportunistically, either to retain assets or to gain new assets. I think it kind of puts things in light about, well, this, how do we make this expense more worthwhile? And if that expense opportunistically is potentially going to drive or retain, as we've described earlier, then why not ensure that the best foot is put forward in representing the firm to ensure that which makes us unique, that differentiates us, all of those things are being manifested and executed across the board and not allowed to fall into silos. I've seen in my own experience where, sales doesn't think marketing gets it, and marketing has no idea what the RFP team is saying, and product, has a very specific point of view. I mean, and respectfully so. But the challenge is to ensure that there is synergy in what is being said, and it is the best representation of what the firm is. So when you look at this thing economically, economic is going to drive the behavior, but you've got to also reflect at what is at stake that these teams are touching, and what the impact could be.
So with all of this in mind, and knowing that you need to scale that story, want consistency of the message, where does AI fit into the mix?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of people are looking to and bringing in AI to, and it's, let's be honest, it's largely an economic issue. Again, where can we get efficiencies? Where can we get economies of scale? Where can we improve workflow? And my concern with AI is that it gets back to some of the earlier comments we've made, Jennifer, which is, AI is great in doing that, but you can't take the person out of the middle. I mean, it doesn't solve for what is the main issue that we've been focused on, which is how do we get the authenticity? How do we get the brand? How do we get the storytelling into the mix and cutting across all of the departments, which is so important to differentiate the firm and ensure that we're not commoditized?
Well, and how do you square that though with compliance regulations? Because I've heard, that can be a lot harder in institutions where there are standards and guidance for AI generated content. How do you still pass that bar while you're deploying AI?
Compliance plays a very important role. And I don't see AI getting in the way of compliance. I think AI can support and be a further guardrail to what compliance is trying to do. I mean, these AI programs, these large language models, these agents which are being deployed can be constructed or written in such a way that you bake in the firm's compliance controls. So you see that happening in lots of the software that's currently being put out into the marketplace. You can bake in the SEC, FINRA, internal controls, just so compliance has a further sense of confidence that the appropriate the appropriate actions are being taken. But it does not disrupt or displace or replace in any way what compliance does.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is make sure you've got those guardrails in place, but that should be something that you can configure and test as you're rolling out AI. It's not a reason to not use it. It's more, how do you make this work in the environment in which you're operating?
Absolutely. 100%.
So we talk about the critical role that proposal teams play, but oftentimes it can be really hard to measure. So how do you do that effectively, and why is it so hard?
What used to frustrate me as a CMO was that we don't know what salespeople do, but you can measure their effectiveness. You know what marketing does, but you have a hard time measuring their effectiveness. Well, take that one or two steps backwards. How do you measure RFP? I guess you can measure RFP effectiveness by what's won or DDQ, what's kept, et cetera. But a lot of people wouldn't give them the credit for that, right? They give that to the salespeople. Again, this gets back to the RFP teams being seen as a utility and not a function or a contributor to the firm's success. And again, I think because everything is looked through the prism of economics. How much we spending for Department A versus Department B? What's the opportunity out there? What's the opportunity for market share? How do we gain that? How, in terms of asset retention, et cetera, et cetera? What role does that RFP department play in that? I think it's much bigger than what is perceived, and I think their contribution could be much bigger than what is expected.
With all of that in mind, how do you actually get to executive level metrics and impact when you're talking about the critical role that these proposal teams and DDQ teams play within an organization?
I'm going to give you an answer that may surprise you, Jennifer. I'm not sure that you can realistically break down the kind of studies, time, effort, cost across multiple departments. I think the firm is better served if they bundle it all up in the aggregate. Right, as opposed to, and I mean, believe me, I worked on some of these ridiculous studies about, if we were able to raise $1 of assets, what was sales contribution, what was marketing contribution, break it down percentage. Who cares? At the bottom line, at the end of the day, it should be all bundled up together as a win for the firm, as a save for the firm, right? I think it's chasing fool's gold to try to figure out each department's contribution, which, and I respect the question, by the way, but I think that the firm is better off if it just looks at wins and losses and everybody gets a chance to own the win, and very frankly, everybody owns a loss.
Oh, I have heard frequently throughout my time at Responsive comments to the tune of, when we accept a bid or pursuit, we're not accepting it for the bid team, we're accepting it for the company.
100%.
So I think your sentiment reflects that. I will say, just to push on it a little bit, at the same time, these teams are put under the microscope around like any other team would be, marketing, et cetera, around dollar in, dollar out. Do I keep investing?
Yeah.
And so even with that one firm in it together mentality, I do still think there's a need to be able to clearly articulate and tie to the bigger.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that if I were running those teams today, where I would be focused was on two things. One of which we talked about, which is, are they articulating the story that best represents the firm in a way that matches the way we want to talk about? So that's one. But the second thing is, and I'd be very focused on this, given the volume that's coming in, given what's at stake, given the amount of effort it takes, are there ways to improve their efficiency and make them more effective in getting the right information out the door in a far more timely basis so they can handle volume? That's where I'd be focused.
Well, and that does actually translate into revenue. So
Absolutely.
I think that's a bit of the art, right? Is, hey, additional volume is coming in. We're able to operate more efficiently, more effectively. We can actually pursue more of those opportunities, and with the right technology and people
Yeah.
in the process, really focus on the right
Yeah.
opportunities as well.
Yeah.
So you're chasing dollars that are winnable dollars, and you're able to put an even better foot forward because of the way you're operating, your storytelling. Like that's, nirvana might be a small or a large word for that, but like that's
Well, it's the golden calf. We all want it, right? We're all chasing it.
there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to come back to AI because you now are kind of on the bleeding edge of what's possible as you're building your company. I think that sometimes financial services gets a bad reputation for being behind or very conservative. And I'd love to understand if you think that's actually the case or not.
I think it's still fair to say that the financial services industry as a whole, across that ecosystem, we're talking wealth managers, banks, insurance companies, are conservative, and for a reason, because they have fiduciary responsibility. We're talking about other people's money or other people's livelihoods, et cetera, et cetera. So they are understandably cautious, as they should be. But I think that there are some people who are more forward thinking than others, or early adopters. Probably the early adopters are more in the digital advice space. That's just my sense from observation, because it's a little closer to and more native to what they're currently doing. But the bigger firms are certainly looking at it, and experimenting with it. Again, it's a leadership issue, frankly. We could go into that conversation. But what AI can do is too big to ignore. And the contribution it could make is such that you really need to become familiar with it and think about how you might be able to apply it to better serve your clients. And my experience and my observation is it will. But I think that the financial service industry is going to be a little more cautious, as they should be, but they should be stepping in.
So, I think, of course, there's been a lot of buzz about AI across every industry. We can't escape it in our news feeds. And some of that banter actually points to a number of investments not paying off, failed experimentation, companies, employees feeling like they're just not really getting it. And so I'd love to hear from you, like how do you think companies actually, cross that chasm and make AI effective when we're hearing so much to the contrary these days?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Jennifer. And I guess there was a recent MIT report, and there's been all sorts of stuff out by McKinsey. So there's no shortage of signals across the board about mixed feelings relative to AI. AI is on all the conference, agendas, and that people are talking about it. But when you take them into the, into the hallway, like, I'm not really sure what we're getting from this, or blah blah blah. So let me just share with you how I see it. Again, having read some of the data about what's going on out there, I think it's clear. A couple things are clear. One is that there still is a large lack of understanding about what AI is and what AI can do. And so if you don't have the right expectations, it's clear you're going to miss the mark because you don't know what to expect from it, right? So how do you measure it? So, secondly, there's a lot of data out there suggests that leadership is not really stepping up to drive adoption, measurement, et cetera, within the organizations for a variety of reasons. And yet, conversely, there is data that suggests that it is being adopted broadly by employees, interestingly, who are either doing it, online within the company or offline, in their private time, and not really sharing that information with the leadership because for a whole host of reasons, is this going to look like, I'm cutting corners on my work, or or am I going to make myself, redundant, whatever the reason is. And so there's a lack of perception between leadership and the rank and file about what this is and how to use it. And I think that the data would support this, that if leadership steps into the mix, mandates the education, trains themselves, mandates the education, and also mandates the sharing across employees, across teams, et cetera, that they would start to see benefits. We have to move from the 1950s, team bowling leagues, within the companies to, programming, programming teams and prompting teams. But I think there's a whole lot of stuff going on that's not happening on the radar screen that I think if it was noticed, recognized, shared up and down the line, I think you start to see a lot greater productivity gains made.
I have to tell you, you have just put the most positive spin on the word mandate. Because I think oftentimes when you hear about AI mandates, it is like, thou shalt adopt AI. What you're saying is more, I think, mandating a mindset and sharing and experimentation, um, which is why I say it's a very positive spin. And, at the end of the day, it does come down to how is AI helping you solve your problems? How can you really pull out the voices of different roles and seniority levels across your team to say we're all embracing it, we're all learning together? I think that's what I've found
Yeah.
personally is like you or I aren't going to know everything there is to know about AI because it's just such an explosive area right now.
Yeah.
But even if we spent outside of the responsive podcast or in a new episode, 30 minutes just saying, what are you using it for? What am I using it for? What's worked? What hasn't? I personally get a ton of value out of that. And that's a big part of my learning. Why aren't we doing that with our own teams? And that does need to come from leadership to say it's a safe space. Please experiment.
We want you to experiment, right? We want you to see how you can improve your productivity. I think, let's be honest, there are certain downsides, there are certain risks involved with AI, but everybody is better off if they're educated about what it is and how to use it and how to leverage it responsively and how it will improve possibly, what you do and how you do it. Why wouldn't you? I mean, why wouldn't you encourage that? So I don't think you have to mandate it. I'd encourage it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the other thing I heard today was if AI is working really well, you're probably doing something wrong because you're not testing it enough. So I suppose taken out of context, that may not sound correct because if you've really been trialing and optimizing and then it is you finally got it humming,
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think, it's not a magic bullet. And so the more that there is this experimentation, iteration, someone the other day said, I just told my team stick with it and magic happened after that. it's it is kind of just about persevere,
Ev-
fair.
ev- everybody, I'm sorry to interrupt, everybody should go through a basic prompt engineering course, class. Everyone should do that, because if you do that, you move from seeing this as a query tool, right, to a problem solving tool, but you have to know how to set up the question to make it effective. But once you learn that, my gosh, the possibilities are unlimited.
No, for sure. Well, another thing I've heard, and this is even from some of our asset management customers, is as they have been using AI extensively for first drafts, they're going back and they can check the sources. They can look at something we have called the trace score, which really gives more of that confidence or quality level, and then go back to that underlying knowledge base and say, oh, wow, like we need to actually update this foundation. So I think there's really just this kind of mutually reinforcing system, and AI can shine a light on your business in ways that really surprise you positively and help you make changes in other areas. And I think that's probably a piece that isn't talked about enough.
It's a great way to help you expand your thinking, but what you don't want to do is have it do your thinking for you, right? Let it become a tool where it helps expand your thinking. So I'm obviously a big fan.
If you were not doing what you were doing right now, but stepped back into the fire, running a sales team with the proposal team, tucked into it, how would you restart that today to do all the things you mentioned in this podcast, to drive the storytelling, to drive the value, to embrace AI?
I would organize all of the teams that are involved in driving the value proposition out into the marketplace in one room and fashion the best story we could tell, and then break it down piece by piece, build the customer journey from start to finish, where everybody's contribution is in that, and make sure that we have systems and organizations in place that can execute and know what the mission is, and make sure that they are consistent and they're organized and they are partnered up.
Well, I think we can leave it there because whether our listeners out there are just stepping into a role or really looking to kind of level up their game, I think it's very sage advice around the criticality of that underlying knowledge, how you can really bring different teams and really the brightest minds in your organization together to contribute to that, to scale it, and to really tell that story throughout the journey and level it up with AI. So
100%.
thank you so much, Matt, for joining me today, and look forward to catching up again in the future.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Responsive. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.